When I hear the word fairy tale, there are many stories that come to mind, such as Rapunzel, Sleeping Beauty, Beauty and the Beast, and Cinderella, but the one that I would like to focus on for now is The Little Mermaid. The Little Mermaid is a classic Danish fairy tale penned by famed author Hans Christian Andersen. You may also know him for his other stories, such as The Little Match Girl, The Ugly Duckling, and The Snow Queen. It's because of these famous and beloved stories that he is often called the father of the modern fairy tale. But back to The Little Mermaid. It was first written and published in 1837 as part of the book Fairy Tales Told for Children, a collection of short stories told for, well, children. The Little Mermaid, as the title suggests, is heavily inspired by traditional folklore about merfolk and water nymphs. Another source of inspiration that was said to have inspired the creation of The Little Mermaid is the 1811 story Undine, as Hans Christian Andersen was said to have been familiar with the tale. To summarize, it was about a human knight who fell in love with the King of the Sea's daughter, only for him to tragically betray her by the end. Although people now know this story by its English name, it was originally titled Den Lille Havfrue, which is the Danish translation for The Little Mermaid. In February of 1846, writer Charles Bonner would go on to create one of, if not the first English translation of the story, as part of a book called A Danish Storybook. Ironically enough, he would actually use the German translation as his basis, as opposed to the original Danish text. But regardless, the translation was made and published, and the rest, as they say, was history. The Little Mermaid, and Hans Christian himself by proxy, would go on to become extremely popular amongst English speakers as well as the rest of the world. One version of the tale you may remember is the classic 1989 animated film by Disney, but the original story is much sadder and even darker in tone. How and why is it sad and dark? Well, let's find out, shall we? Let's finally get into the original story of The Little Mermaid. Down in the deep blue sea lied a beautiful and majestic castle, with its coral walls, tall arched windows made of the clearest amber, and a roof made up of shells which opened to reveal the most beautiful of pearls. It was truly a sight to behold. Living inside the castle walls was the Sea King. The king is said to have been a widower for years, leaving his mother to help take care of the place. She was a wise woman who was proud of her nobility, wearing 12 oysters on her tail, as opposed to the usual 6 like other people of her stature. But despite that, she was deeply devoted to caring for the king's 6 daughters, and loved them like they were her own children. Although all of the daughters were beautiful, the youngest was said to be the most beautiful one of all. She was born with deep blue eyes, and skin that was the definition of smooth and clear. She and the rest of her sisters would live a happy life. They would regularly play in the castle halls and planted flower beds in the castle garden. Each sister planted her flower bed differently. One was in the shape of a whale, another in the shape of a mermaid. But the youngest was different. Hers was quite simple in comparison. It was in the shape of a circle and was planted with red flowers that were as bright and vibrant as the sun itself. But that's not all. She was a quiet, yet curious and thoughtful person. There were 2 things she wanted more than anything: a beautiful marble statue, and to learn more about the world above the sea. There was so much that she wanted to know, but luckily an opportunity came. The grandmother told the daughters that when they turn 15, they will be given a chance to swim up to the surface to witness the world above. But the problem was that the Little Mermaid had to wait 5 years for her turn, unlike her sisters who only had to wait around a year. So the sisters made a promise to each other. When one of them returns home, they will tell the others about what they saw and what their favorite discoveries were. The eldest was first, and she was amazed by the beautiful and lively city and churches that she witnessed. Hearing about the eldest sister's experience made the Little Mermaid more eager for her turn. One by one, her 5 older sisters went up to the surface to see what it was like. But as they got older and were given the freedom to go above any time they wanted, they all came to the same conclusion. The magic and wonder they had first felt had faded, and they have decided that things were far better under the sea. But the youngest remained undeterred. She hoped and wished for the big day to come. Lo and behold, it did. Before she could go, she was dressed by her grandma. White lilies and pearls decorated her hair, and 8 oysters were clamped onto her tail. "Beauty is pain," her grandmother said. But she didn't buy it. She preferred to have gone with a simpler look, but she dared not say a word. When she was ready, she swam up to the surface. There, she spotted a massive ship. It was there that a handsome prince was celebrating his birthday. The Little Mermaid was in awe of the prince, who looked no older than she was, as well as the party that took place, so much so that she stayed there until the sun began to set. But things took a turn for the worse. The winds and the sea waves were growing stronger, and it was becoming dangerous. The prince fell into the water, frightening the mermaid. She knew that humans could not survive in the water, and so with all her strength, she pulled the prince up to the shore. She stayed with him until the sun rose, looking over his beautiful face. He reminded her of a marble statue she had in her part of the garden. She touched his cheeks as they regained their color. She kissed him and wished that he would live. She took a moment to admire her surroundings before hiding herself before any humans could see her. Soon the prince awoke and began smiling to everyone but her. But how could he? He wasn't able to know who rescued him. But regardless, the moment saddened the Little Mermaid, who swam back home. As per their promise, her sisters asked her what she saw, but she said nothing. Since that day, she would swim to where she left the prince, but try as she might, she could never see him. She would always return with great sorrow and would be comforted by sitting in her spot in the castle garden. There she would tend to her flowers and cradle the statue that looked like the prince. One day, she just couldn't take it anymore. She finally told one of her sisters, and slowly but surely the rest of her siblings found out. To her delight, they knew where the prince was and took her to a place where she could clearly see him. She was ecstatic. From then on, she would go and spend her time in that exact spot. Although the prince did not know of her existence, it didn't stop her from growing fonder of him and humans as a whole. She loved how vast their world was compared to hers, and how they could always travel to incredible places, be it by land or water. There was so much about humans that she wanted to know more about. So one day she gathered the courage to ask her grandmother about them. "Grandma," the Little Mermaid asked, "if humans don't drown, can they live forever? Or do they die like us merfolk?" Her grandmother replied, "Of course they will eventually die as well. But the difference is that we can live for way longer than they do. We can live up to over 300 years. But there was a catch. Although humans may live shorter than merfolk, their souls are immortal. When they die, their souls will be able to go to a heavenly place, unlike mermaids who, when they die, they will be reduced to sea foam." The Little Mermaid was shocked by this information. She thought to herself, "Oh, what would I give to have an immortal soul? I'd rather have that than live for over 300 years. But her grandmother told her not to worry about it. After all, 300 years was still a long time. And besides, there was a royal party that they had to prepare. They might as well celebrate and focus on that. The ball was the definition of opulence. The castle was decorated from head to toe, and mermaids and mermen celebrated through singing. The Little Mermaid sang the loveliest and was applauded for her performance. But despite the joy of the party, she could never forget about the human prince and the sorrow she felt for not having an immortal soul like humans had. She quietly escaped the party to her little spot in the garden. It was there that she heard the sound of a hunting horn from above. It was the prince, the one who she loved more than her mother and father. "I will do anything to be with him and have an immortal soul. Perhaps the sea witch will be able to help me." Though she was terrified of the witch, she was still determined to reach her goal. After making through the strange and terrifying forest that surrounded the witch's house, she came face to face with her at last. The witch explained that splitting her tail into legs would be a painful process, and that despite her beauty and graceful moves, her every step would be like glass shards stabbing at her feet. The Little Mermaid accepted the offer nonetheless, but the sea witch told her to think carefully. She wouldn't be able to turn back into a mermaid and see her loved ones again, and the only way to gain an immortal soul is to win the prince's love and marry him. If he did not fall in love with her and married someone else, then the Little Mermaid would die the day after the wedding and be reduced to sea foam. She thought for a moment and decided that it was worth it and that she was ready for the task. But wait, there was one more catch. The young mermaid must cut her tongue out in exchange for her human legs. In the witch's mind, with the girl's beauty and grace, surely she could enchant the prince with ease. The Little Mermaid once again agreed, and so was given a potion that would turn her into a human. She hurried home and secretly drank the witch's potion. As promised, the transformation was excruciating. She collapsed after it was complete and woke up the next day to find the prince staring at her. He was intrigued by her and asked for her name. The Little Mermaid didn't respond, for she didn't have her voice, instead relying on her facial expressions. He was charmed by the girl and offered her his hand and to stay in his castle. She was dressed in the finest of clothes, and in the castle she witnessed performers who sang beautifully and entertained the prince and his family. The mermaid was saddened knowing she had an even lovelier voice, but could not show it. But as she danced, she entranced the prince and everyone else. She would spend the following day spending time with the prince, who grew fonder of her as time went by, though he never thought to make her his queen. One day, the prince told the girl about how happy she made him over the past few weeks, and how she reminded him of the person that saved his life, thinking of her as someone sent by the gods. Little did she know that she was that person, but she remained hopeful that her goal can be accomplished nonetheless. Just then, the prince was set to marry a beautiful princess from a nearby kingdom. He initially wasn't happy about this, thinking that she wasn't as lovely as the woman he saw in the temple, whom he believes was his savior. But he's shocked to find out that she was the temple woman, having gone there for her education. He instantly fell in love and announced his marriage for her. To say this broke the Little Mermaid's heart would be a massive understatement. She was absolutely devastated by the news. She had sacrificed her voice, her tail, and her ability to see her family, all for him and the chance to have an immortal soul. But alas, it was all for nothing. There was nothing she could truly do, so she spent the prince and the princess's wedding dancing to the music, all the while death was in her mind. She knew it wouldn't be long before her fate would come to her. A few hours later, the prince and his new wife were fast asleep in their chambers, during which the Little Mermaid stared at the sky and sea, awaiting her tragic end. Just then, she saw her sisters rise from the sea, but with most of their hair gone. It turned out that they had traded their hair to the sea witch to help their younger sister. They handed her a sharp knife and instructed her to kill the prince before the sun rose. When his blood spilled on her feet, she will revert back to her mermaid form and she will get her voice back and rejoin her family. They pleaded with her to do the deed so that they can be reunited once and for all, for her grandmother had grown stressed over her disappearance and even lost some of her hair because of it. With the knife in hand, the Little Mermaid went to where the prince and his new wife were fast asleep. It was there that she took one final look at both of them. As she readied to plunge the knife into the prince's body, she heard him whispering his wife's new name as he was dreaming. She was the only thing he could think about. This gave the mermaid pause. She couldn't bring herself to kill someone and take them away from their true love, and so she threw the knife into the ocean. It was then that she felt herself dying, as the sun was beginning to rise, and slowly but surely, she started to turn into sea foam. Just then, the mermaid felt her spirit rise all the way up to the sky, until she was surrounded by enchanting, transparent-like creatures. She wondered where she exactly was, and who were these people, if they even were people. It was then one of them revealed that she is amongst the daughters of the air, and she was in the heavenly place her grandmother told her about. Even though she was born as a mermaid, she would be gifted an immortal soul for her sacrifice. The Little Mermaid didn't know what to say, but for the first time, she truly felt free and at peace. But before she could receive her immortal soul, she decides to pay the prince and his wife one last visit. She saw that they were looking for her, so to comfort them and give them peace, she kisses both of them on the forehead, before rising up to the sky, to the heavenly place.